from 9 who they had full intentions of convicting of something that none of them did. And then it resolved itself down to 7. So it's a misnomer, those who still quote Central Park 5. It was 7. And what happened was Automatics was able to get his client off, which reduced the number to 6. And one guy copped a plea, which brought it down to 5, ergo to Central Park 5. But it is inaccurate to call it the case of Central Park 5. It was 7 young men involved. And in that particular case, the victim in this case did not identify any of her attackers because, first of all, they didn't do it. And she had to say nothing. The rage in all of these white men, the laws that was broke by these detectives, many of them to this still day acknowledges everything they did was correct. Everybody from the police commissioner on down claims that everything they did was correct. They broke constitutional laws. They broke the very laws that undergird this society, all because they wanted to lock up these 7 men, the Central Park 7. Thank God so much. Let me just take a minute to say thank God for Automatics. Attorney Maddox was trying to get all 7 from the attorneys that they had, because he was determined to walk all 7 out of the front door without handcuffs back home to their families. But he was able to get 1, and that's a good thing. Unfortunately, the 4 Black attorneys who was involved with the case, of the 7, 4 of them were all disbarred, and the one who wasn't disbarred, Joe Mack, was suspended. So we should never forget this case, because not only were the victims the actual people who were so-called involved in the case, and they in fact did not do anything with the case, but also they went after the attorneys, which shows you that this is why Black attorneys, as well as other attorneys, give their clients over to the system. And if you fight, you will pay a heavy price.
And one of the lessons that we should have learned from this particular case, the Central Park jogger case, is that police officers and detectives and members of the district attorney's office didn't care about innocent or guilt. They just wanted to arrest anyone from our community. They fabricated evidence. They claimed there was blood evidence that linked these young men, the 5 who were convicted, to the crime. We found out that that was a lie. They coerced them to make certain statements, as anyone could see. When you look at the video recordings of their interviews or their interrogations. So, we learned that in the minds of these police officers and detectives and the district attorney, it wasn't important to get the guilty individuals in this particular case. They just wanted anyone from our community. And when the real culprit admitted or confessed that he was the perpetrator in this particular crime, that he worked alone, that he knew any of the individuals, as opposed to acquiescing to the truth and to the facts of this case, they held strong and a lot of the erroneous things that they did. But as I stated, it was one of the most repugnant acts, which continues to happen, is that when sometimes in some particular cases, the detectives, members of the police department and district attorney's office are just concerned about getting a conviction. They're not totally concerned whether or not it's the right victim or not.
And let me just want to say real quickly, Automatics, disbarred. Robert Burns, disbarred. Colin Moore, disbarred. Joe Mack, suspended. And it's not a coincidence that this all came after their defense in the Central Park jogger case.
And all of these African-American attorneys as well. The
Yeah.
last historical piece we want to talk about, the 420, 1853, the formation of the Underground Railroad, a system that was effectively helpful in assisting many enslaved Africans in this country to escape. Why don't you remind our viewing audience about this very significant historical railroad?
Well, certainly we will always be indebted to those who participated in the Underground Railroad. The majority of their names are not known, and some of the names involved will never be known. But suffice it to say, I know people, are real familiar with Harriet Tubman and some others prominent names, but there were so many heroes and sheroes that participated that took their life. Their life would be hanging in the balance if they were caught hiding runaway African slaves. And so, to those who gave them comfort in their homes, those who hid them at various locations, safe houses, as we would probably call them today, and fed them, gave them money, to get them along their way and directed them on various ways to get to freedom. Much kudos to all of them that participated in the Underground Railroad.
All right. So now we'll fast forward to some current events. And before we talk about today is Tuesday, I believe April 20th. And some of you may know that Officer Chauvin was recently just convicted earlier today of the murder of George Floyd. We're going to get into that. But we want to handle some old business first and remind our viewing audience or update our viewing audience about another police criminality case. Michael, Officer Jacob Blake. Many of our viewing audience seen the video where Jacob Blake shot, Officer Rustin Sheskey shot brother Jacob Blake as he was attempting to enter his vehicle. Why don't you remind our viewing audience of the fact that this officer, who enraged many at the time by shooting brother Blake in the back, I think it was 6 or 7 times. He's back on the job now. He's not going to be charged with any criminal charges, and he's back full duty.
Yes, he is. And first, want to thank God so much for sparing the life of Jacob Blake. Now he's paralyzed as we speak, and hopefully that condition can improve. But as of now, his lower body is paralyzed. And to date, Sheskey hasn't been charged. So he's gone off of paid administrative leave to now he's back to a regular tour of duty. And this only shows you that there is no real accountability in America for whites that shoot blacks. Unfortunately, Blake was not in the commission of a crime, and it was totally unnecessary to shoot him as he was moving around his car. So I don't know what's going to happen down the road with this case, but here they quietly 2 weeks ago, and they just announced it, but 2 weeks ago they took him off administrative leave, and he's actually back at work now, and that's a crying shame.
All right, we'll keep our viewing audience abreast whether or not the prosecutor decides to press any criminal charges against the officer. I doubt it, since he's going back to full duty. I'm like you, Michael. I had problems with his actions in shooting our brother in the back at close range so many times. I thought it was highly unnecessary. But once again, a case of police criminality against a member of our community. All right, as I mentioned earlier, Officer Chauvin, former police officer Chauvin, was found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter by a jury of his peers. Many people were surprised that he got convicted of all 3 charges, including the heaviest, which is murder 2, where he can face 40 years in prison. And of course, for the murder 3, 25 years, and manslaughter, he may be facing 10 years The jury responded very quickly. I believe the case was handed to the jury on Monday, which was yesterday. And earlier today, they unanimously came forward with a guilty verdict of all three of the major charges. I know many are happy in our community, and I, as well as myself, but let's not rush to call this justice. Justice is not completed until he's sentenced and he receives a sufficient sentence. But before we talk about sentences, Michael, what are your views on the conviction and the speed by which the jury convicted him? It was real quick. Some thought it would at least last until Friday, but clearly the jury overwhelmingly felt that there was enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt to prove former police officer Chauvin was guilty.
Well, I believe that this was political theater at best. I think everybody involved understood that America was on trial. America's system of justice was on trial. America's law enforcement community was on trial and the whole world was watching. I think for them to reach a decision in 10 hours of deliberations only shows that it was a costume party and everybody played a role, everybody came in with their various trinkets, and it was really just a setup to show that Black America can receive justice. And to me, it wasn't justice no matter how you look at it, even if you don't think it was political theater. The only thing that came out of this was Chauvin was held accountable for what he did. But what about the other three officers? The FOP, Fraternal Order Police, has already gotten the victory because all four of them was not being tried at the same time. So we've already lost, because now you got to go that road again and convict three other officers who were a part of this situation. So it's already problematic. They should have all been tried at the same time. So they win similar to the way in Maryland and Baltimore, the way those cops who killed Freddie Gray were being tried separately. That's how the FOP got it. So he had to fall on the sword ultimately for everybody. And this helped every major police department, every sheriff's department in the country, marshals, everything. It helped everybody because now even white people can say there is at least a modicum of justice. As irregular as this is, you have never seen a chief of the department testify damning information against a police officer. You've never seen 2 or 3 lieutenants, 3 or 4 sergeants, a training officer, an officer that reviews the medical aspects and things. All, like I said, the training officer who trains all the officers that come through the academy. You've never seen a coterie of police officers testifying against one of their own this way. Because normally the FOP tells you they will ruin your career if you dare say a word against a fellow police officer. But in this particular case, everybody went through and said their part, even though the defense tried to put George Floyd himself on trial, tried to put onlookers, observers, the crowd on trial, tried to change everything to even carbon monoxide or the whatever drugs existed in Floyd's body. So everything was all for naught. Whatever would stick, the defense was willing to use. But ultimately, I believe this was theater. And if you don't believe that was theater, Then look at the press conference after, where the whole family, where all these attorneys all took a victory lap. Crump and all these other attorneys did absolutely nothing. I'm going to say this again. Crump and the other attorneys did absolutely nothing. They filled out the requisite forms and they won the $27 million settlement before the trial even began. So it was all theater. All of the people that was there, I'm not saying they don't have good hearts. I'm not throwing shade that way. The family members were sincere, and the friends, loved ones were all sincere. But you know, $27 million will make a whole lot of people sincere.
And Michael, I definitely agree with you. This particular conviction is not a referendum on African Americans receiving justice in this country. This is only one case. We would like to see this repeated whenever police officers act inappropriately. But also, I think it's inappropriate for the attorneys or anyone to take a victory lap. We cannot forget that there's still a sentencing. As you stated, Michael, we cannot forget that there's also 3 officers, additional officers who participated in this murder who should be equally, convicted. So there's no time to take a victory lap. And I think when we do take a victory lap, that sometimes that gives an out for the prosecutors or the judge to be more lenient as it relates to sentencing and as it relates to convicting other officers. So we should be equally upset, equally angry, put equal amount of pressure on the other 3 officers who participated and didn't do their job on that particular day in saving Floyd's life until all of them are convicted, and not only convicted, but properly sentenced. Now, some of us may forget Officer Van Dyke in Chicago, who was guilty of shooting our brother in the back 16 times, was convicted of second-degree murder, but he only received a 6-year sentence, which is not justice. And that sentence given by a judge was so outrageous that the prosecutor appealed the sentencing to a court, and the court struck it down. So this police officer is going to get, after being charged and convicted of murder 2, is only going to have to do approximately 3 years in jail for shooting our brother 16 times. So we shouldn't take a victory lap because when we relax, when we become happy, our enemies or those who have no support of African Americans receiving justice become emboldened. So the pressure has to be kept on. No one should be manifesting their happiness about what has happened until Chauvin gets sufficiently sentenced. As I stated, he's facing about 80 years, but it's going to be up to the judge to decide how much time he's going to spend in jail. As I stated earlier, 40 years for the murder 2, 25 years for the murder 3, and potentially 10 years for the manslaughter. So that's 75 years he potentially faced. So let's see. And once he's convicted and sentenced properly, appropriately, then, I think it's appropriate to express some measure of happiness about that happening, and plus the additional officers being sentenced. But Michael, the judge also said something that was kind of telling in this particular case. Some individuals may know on Saturday, Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, participated in a rally, and she made some statements as it relates to our community, continue to protest and continue to and if he's not convicted, our community should expect to be confrontational. Now, the defense attorney ran with that particular statement and asked the judge, for a mistrial, trying to claim that Congresswoman Maxine Waters prejudiced the jury because she called for a confrontation. But those of us who are familiar with the English language, or those of us who have access to a dictionary, know confrontation doesn't always necessitate violence. And this is something that the defense attorney attempted to suggest to the judge, that the jury might be tampered with if they think that there's going to be violence if they don't convict Officer Chauvin, which would somehow, influence their decision, which is erroneous. The judge made a statement as if he agreed or he went along with the defense a definition on confrontation. You know, he said that that the defense attorney, he said she may have given you something on appeal that may result in this trial being overturned. Let me say it again. The judge, in response to the defense attorney, called for for a mistrial. The judge said in the courtroom that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this trial being overturned. So we have to pay careful attention to that. As I stated, when she called for confrontation, that didn't denote violence. That's something that the defense attorney brought up, and I was kind of surprised that the judge jumped on his interpretation of what she said and made that particular statement. So what do you think, Michael, about the possibility of this? Because of course his defense attorney is going to file for an appeal, and they'll probably include Congresswoman Walters' statement. What do you think is the likelihood of that being entertained and possibly him being successful?
Well, from the outset, what happened was she was responding to questions she was being interviewed at that time. So she was asked what would happen if Chauvin was acquitted. And she said to the effect, stay on the street and demand justice. She also said, get more confrontation. Now, she was not saying to get more confrontational with police officers physically. She was using the language that, and I'm glad you said language, by the way, Noel, language. She was using a language that more often than not is not in the traditional civil rights movement. Normally you get a certain kind of language from people who have a civil rights background as opposed to the Black Power background. So you have to remember, in the civil rights spectrum, people use the language and call it a movement. In Black Power, it is characterized as struggle because you're willing to fight for independence, you're willing to put it all on the line, as opposed to the civil rights who are more than willing to negotiate, to sit down at a table with our enemies and work out a deal. So she went off of what would normally be the civil rights movement and said something that you would get in the streets. Be more confrontational. She said, but for justice. In other words, challenge the justice system. So the system of justice, we all know, has not been favorable for African Americans. It just hasn't been. So she used that language, and normally that type of language is not used by elected officials or civil rights people. So there's a different dynamic to it. And you know yourself that people in civil rights and elected officials, they are so precise and double talk in their language, which is why they submitted a bill for the study of reparations. Not for reparations, the study of reparations, as if it needs a review. So that is not grounds for an appeal. She was not talking about attack police, attack the court system. She was talking about stay out in the streets, because it was the streets that got it to where there was a prosecution. Had there not been a tape, and we got to remember that, had there not been video footage of that 9 minutes and 29 seconds, none of us would know who George Floyd was. This was 9 minutes, and in those 9 minutes, you saw white supremacy at its finest. You saw an arrogant, out of control, I want to say rogue cop, but he's not a rogue cop because he's not the only one. But he was able to show his arrogance by staying there, even though he heard pleas from the crowd saying, "You killing him, stop, check. And they even told him blood was coming out of George Floyd's nose, his mouth, and that urine was coming out of his pants. Consequently, they was telling him, you killing him. He ignored all of that. He was defiant to the end. So I'm just saying that to say that the language that Congresswoman Waters used was apropos for that moment when asked that we got to stay in the street, we got to confront, because you were supposed to confront evil. Christians are supposed to confront evil and the devil. Say you the devil and tell you to get behind me, Satan. So I don't see anything wrong with her language. As a matter of fact, it would be refreshing to hear that more from Congress people. But she cares a little more than the average Congressperson.
And for those who don't know, the definition of confrontation is a hostile or argumentative meeting or situation between opposing parties. So, and instituted in that particular work, confrontation, it doesn't necessarily denote violence. I expect the defense attorney to make that particular interpretation, but I was very much surprised that the judge went along with it. As I stated, he claims that her use of the word confrontation may have given the defense attorney an appeal that may result in the trial being overturned. For what? She called for a confrontational response if he's not found, if the officer's not found guilty. But that no way in the world, and if you know her background and her history, she never calls for violence. But to hear the judge adopt the defense counsel's interpretation of her comment when there was really no relation was very much surprising. And I might remind our viewing audience, this is the man who's going to decide how much time Officer Chauvin receives. So, I was very much, taken aback, not only of his accepting the defense attorney's definition of Congresswoman Maxine Waters' comment, but also when he continued to criticize her, I was looking at his facial, the motions of his mouth and his eyes, and he was very angry when she said nothing at all. I mean, she represents a community who has to bear the brunt of many of this police criminality, this police brutality, and he sort of just act as if she's just supposed to be polite in her response to what we're all experiencing. So, it's very telling, in my humble opinion, of the judge's sentiments as it relates, to this particular case. And, I'll wait, to see how the judge decides to sentence Officer Chapman, and that's going to be very significant.
Yeah, but this tells you something about him.
Yes.
Something so lightweight and innocent, and that shows you something about him from the outset. So this was theater, so much theater, and this is just it's not justice, but I would say that Chauvin was held accountable. But right. Again, there's 3 officers that remain free right now. Chauvin was remanded today because he was out on appeal. On bond, pardon me. He was out on bond this whole time. So tonight will be his first night in justice. And let's see how many necks he step on and hold down in jail.
Okay. The other police officers, what do you think the likelihood of them also being found guilty? Do we know what they're charged with? I'd have to look at that. Do you know offhand what that?
I don't recall.
Right, but there's definitely was some complicity. Michael, when you describe the conditions that Brother Floyd experienced as his life was being taken from him, and I call this a modern day lynching. This is just as grotesque as some of the lynchings that we talk about from yesteryear, what we observed. I think the officers had a responsibility. They sat by, they heard the same thing that Officer Chauvin did. They were also on his body. They had a responsibility to stop what was going on. They didn't. So, family, we have to wait to see if they're going to be similarly charged and aggressively convicted, and then sentenced. Once we have all 3 of those components, then I think on this particular case, we can relax. Any closing comments, Mike?
No, you covered it.
Okay, we like to also fast forward to another case that came to the public. Our organization had dealt with this particular case in 2006. Officer Carol Horn, who's a female Black police officer in Buffalo, she was fired from her police job. And what did she do? She observed her partner choking a handcuffed prisoner, and she intervened. She verbally instructed him to stop what he was doing because she seen the individual maybe almost passing out. So she was telling her partner to let up, to let go, and her partner refused. So she physically intervened to stop her partner from killing this individual, and for that, she was terminated from her position. The officer claimed that she physically assaulted him, and there was some consideration at the time arresting her. Now, any intelligent person should understand that a police officer is not going to assault another police officer for making an arrest of a perpetrator. When you hear the story that she says that her partner was a little out of control and he was choking out the perpetrator, to go with the officers, the white officer who was actually choking the subject and almost arrest the other officer who was attempting him to not do it is preposterous. She was ultimately fired. And, our organization at the time, big kudos to 100 Blacks member Eric Josie. He had reached out to this officer when we found out about this in 2006 to come to her defense. He played a big role in appealing to her city commons, which is compatible to our city council, asking for them to reinstate her. But before we get further down what happened, Michael, why don't you remind or give your comments on what this sister experienced?
Oh, she was heartbroken that so many people did not come to her aid. They came much, much later. I sat down with her years ago. I went up to Buffalo and we had that frank discussion. She, they're not even mentioning the fact that Kyle Skotsky is the officer who he assaulted her, he attacked her. And she sustained injuries to her jaw, shoulder.
Now this is after she intervened to try to stop him.
This after she intervened. He was so out of control that he went after her, and she sustained injuries and had to go out on the job sick, and that just gave them more fuel to fire her. Real good sister with a real good heart. You can feel just the love in her heart if you ever talk to her. And good person. And she did what every good police officer that brings pride to the uniform should do: stop an out of control cop from killing somebody who's already been arrested and handcuffed. And all you got to do is put them in the car and take them away. But you instead want to just beat them down and choke them out. Totally unnecessary. She stopped a George Floyd from happening before George Floyd, and she was dismissed. The city council knew it. The mayor knew it. The Buffalo Police Department all knew it, but they all allowed her to be terminated. And now there has been a reversal, and thank God for that judge who said enough is enough. She suffered for 15 long years. It's time to be fair and upright and give her pension. She fought for it all the years, and I was always on the phone with her over the years, and certainly Eric Josie, who's our legal genius that does so much work without a law license, but brilliant with respect to law, our field marshal extraordinaire, got on the case, and like a pit bull that Eric Josie is, he was able to just keep fighting and prolong this. And obviously, in light of these cases that happened recently, now there's a different attitude towards somebody that's handcuffed, and that played a big role. George Floyd and these other cases, Breonna Taylor and others, all played a big role in Carol Horn, who's a hero. So now she's being acknowledged by us, if no one else, as the great hero that she was. She was the ram in the bush, to speak, scripturally. She was that ram in the bush that saved, I'll tell you his name, David Neal Mack, saved his life. He would have been killed that day in 2006 had it not been for her. So just big ups to our sister Carol Horn, and we love you and respect the work that you do, and certainly the road that you tread is sacred ground.
And Michael, as you stated earlier, she stopped somebody from being killed, and she did what we expect a good officer to do, that when they see another police officer acting overtly aggressively and in a criminal fashion, to intervene, and that's what she attempted to do. And for that, she was assaulted by the police officer, and then she was almost charged criminally by the district attorney's office, by her department, and then she ultimately was forced, to resign, to leave her job. So that was, and this is why, as 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care, we always say the issue is not training, the issue is punishment. And when an officer acts inappropriately or acts criminally, if he's not dealt with, then that's a sign to other members of the department that they can get away with similar treatment. Her coming to the defense to attempt to try to intervene in an officer acting inappropriately, and what does that say to other officers who may see officers acting in brutal fashion or in a criminal fashion, and they want to intervene to try to stop it? What does that say to them? So it discourages good officers for acting inappropriately when you punish or terminate or attempt to prosecute an officer that acts appropriately. So as you stated, Michael, we're glad that the sister finally received justice. She received some back pay, and she's going to receive a pension. And on the side note, that particular officer that she was working with today is in jail for another case that he was involved in, where he was acting brutal against 3 other teenagers. So he's presently in the federal prison for another conviction that occurred afterwards. So if her agency had did the right thing and got him off the job at that particular time, he wouldn't even be in prison because he shouldn't have been a police officer. And another side note, it was a Black mayor that we appealed to back when she was terminated to come to the sister's defense to look at the case. And as I stated earlier, the probability of a Black female officer assisting a prisoner and attacking a police officer for doing his job is outrageous to even suggest that. The Black mayor of Buffalo at the time didn't come to the sister's defense and allowed her to be attacked by the district attorney's office as well as a police agency.
Well, the Black mayor now has been the last one, and if he signed off on it, because the city council and the something like a controller's office has already signed off on her pension, or the whatever they call a controller in Buffalo, and the city council has signed off. This present Black mayor has been the last one, and I don't know if he has yet, but they're going through the fine print, her and her lawyer, to work the details out. But she's going to receive her pension and her just due 15 years late, and she went through a living hell. And but she was able to survive, like the tradition of strong Black women. She was able to survive and raise all of her children, and now she even has grandchildren. So she'll finally get some modicum of justice, but it's been too long. And like I said, you can tell a champion when you see one, because she's been able to go all these years and maintain the fact that she was done wrong and stood strong. And so you have to commend her in every way possible.
And I might add also that she was like 2 months at the time away from retirement.
That's right.
At the time. So she was a tenured officer, and what she had to say in relations to what she did and why she did it was totally ignored for this brutal white police officer. What she did is reminiscent of what our own member did, Yvette Lee, in the street crime, testifying before the city council about the brutality and street crime in New York City Police Department. And she was fired by Police Commissioner Schaefer for having the audacity to be critical to the New York City Police Department before the city council and before the public. So as I stated, this propensity of police commissioners, police chiefs, mayors to ignore police criminality when good police officers step forward to report it, and they wind up getting punished or transferred or demoted or terminated, is what perpetuates, what we see now as it relates to this police criminality or brutality. It's not a lack of training, it's the support that these police officers receive from the upper brass in their department. So big ups to the sister, big ups to Officer Yvette Lee, and all of the other officers out there on the force who stand up to this brutality. All right, Michael, we want to talk about Colorado State Representative Ron Hanks. He made a mockery statement in regards to lynching and to the 3/5 clause. Why don't you talk about that particular story?
Yeah, well, he was on the state floor, the state legislature floor, and made a mockery about lynching and the 3/5 clause, saying that the 3/5 clause in the Constitution was just for more Southern political representation. But he's acting as if he doesn't realize that dehumanizes African humanity, that not only does it dehumanize African humanity and strip us of our humanity, but it also undergirds white supremacy and strengthens the South to a point where it could steal land from indigenous people, Native Americans, and it can also dominate and make their position in the US Congress all the more stronger. So white supremacy raised its head again in Colorado, which is all the way on the West Coast. However, it shows you that these are all part of the old Confederacy, these types that will weigh in and congratulate the South for maneuvering that Black people who were enslaved was considered 3/5. So when you add up 5, now you got 3 more votes. So that based on that, they were able to have more representation in Congress. So he made a mockery of something and pretended like it was just for political representation, but it was for power. And that power gave it an equal balance with the North, which continued that lifestyle, white supremacist and racial domination.
And when individuals such as a representative, elected official make such a flippant comment, disrespecting the history of suffering that African Americans had to experience, this is nothing to joke about. This is nothing to minimize. This is nothing to mock. But this is just individuals in 2021 willingness to just disrespect and totally disregard, what African Americans have gone through and continue to go through. And it's part and parcel of what we're seeing today in the atmosphere in this country. It's such a disrespectful comment made by somebody who really knows better, but they don't care. They enjoy being disrespectful. They enjoy acting as if they're not cognizant of the significance of these incidents, and it's kind of responsible in terms of contributing to the atmosphere of not only what we've seen when on the attack of the Capitol building, but also some of the decisions and some of the things that we're seeing in law enforcement interactions between members of the African American community. So disrespectful. Closing comments on this guy, Mike?
Yeah, I would just say that he's indicative of what you find so much of this in the Republican Party. And it's not like I got a love affair going with Democrats. I don't, because they're equally as bad. But Trump supporters like Ron Hanks, they tend to be more public in things they say because they don't fear retribution. And at the same time, they know it helps them in the Republican Party when they outright show disdain for Black people. So he has no fear of not getting back in office. So he was able to show you how he really felt, about Black people.
And let me go back to the story we talked about earlier with Maxine Waters. Mitch McConnell had even made some statement about censuring Maxine Waters for a comment. And I thought that was ridiculous. I didn't hear him say anything about the verdict as it relates to Officer Chauvin being convicted. So they pick and choose what they want to address. If you listen to their words, some of their comments, that'll let you know, their worldview on how they feel about a whole lot of things. But another story you want to touch on real quick, Michael, there was an individual. Hello?
Are we going to talk about the 61-year-old?
Yeah, who rammed his car?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about now.
Okay.
Okay. There was an individual, a white individual, who rammed his vehicle into a police officer and dragged him, a distance away. Now, this happened in Minnesota, the same place where all of this police negativity is occurring. Michael, inform our viewing audience about this particular story.
Yeah, this 61-year-old, earlier that day, he went into a lumber yard, and they confronted him in the lumber yard and told him he had to put on a mask. He got so mad, the person who told him to put on a mask, he assaulted that person. After he assaulted that person, he left. After he assaulted the person, he left. Police officers picked him up a little later that day. They found him, picked him up. Consequently, when the police officer had his arm in the car, he takes off. It was a pickup truck. He takes off with the police officer's arm in his car on the driver's side, drags him while he's ramming his car into a police vehicle. But in that process, while he's got the police officer arm in the car, he picks up a hammer and goes upside the police officer's head, bashes him right in the head, rams the car right into a police car, and guess what? He's not shot. He's not shot. Now, Dante Wright was shot for having air fresheners on his rearview mirror. And we know that George Floyd was killed allegedly over a counterfeit $20 bill. He drags a police officer, could have killed him in that dragging, because your feet get caught under that wheel, you in a world of trouble. If your body get caught under that wheel, you in trouble. And takes his hammer, hit the cop in the head, and he's not shot. He's taken into custody without incident, only in America. Your thought?
And there's far too many instances, many of it, with the advent of everyone having cameras, everyone having phone cameras, cameras on their homes, of so many instances where police officers use constraint, a phenomenal amount of constraint in terms of dealing with white violent perpetrators. And when you contrast who are guilty of committing criminal acts, crimes, and when you contrast that, what we see far too often is innocent members of the African-American community accused of committing violations, not even criminal acts, ultimately elevating their interaction with police officers into a violent interaction, many times using their lives, sometimes, as we talked earlier, about our brother being paralyzed. So, the contradiction, and that's why we always go back to that this isn't an issue of training. And, I really get so infuriated when I hear, especially members of our community, because I expect them to say it, who bring up the issue of training as it relates to being part and parcel the problem that we're seeing in too many of these instances. It's not a matter of training, because if officers use the same amount of constraint to white perpetrators that they use to blacks and fought or interactions with members of the public, then we wouldn't have so many of the problems that we do have. It seems as if far too often than not, police officers are responding to the racism their racial views or dislike or hatred in many cases of African Americans when they approach them in the way that they respond to them. So you have an instance, like you said, Michael, where not only an individual is dragging a police officer and assaulting him with a hammer, and him ultimately not being shot. With so many of the instances that we see now, as you stated, with Floyd being accused of passing a fake $20 bill. Now, he may not even know the bill was a fake bill. How many of us have had fake bills and we didn't know until we attempt to spend it? So, a lot of times you're not even arrested if you have a fake bill because, they more target individuals who produce or make fake bills. So as it relates to this particular case, when you contrast that to what we see so many in the African-American community, you see what the problem, the real genesis or the real cause of these problems is racism, white supremacy, in terms of the way police officers respond to white people, white perpetrators, and the way they respond to Black perpetrators.
Yes, and I don't know what kind of time we have left, but I got to ask you your take on President Biden and Vice President Harris with respect to them commenting on the George Floyd case.
Well, we use a term here on this program very frequently when we say political theater. That's what I think it is. I mean, the unique thing about the Floyd case is that it was on video. It's very difficult, if not almost impossible, for anybody to be against the way the police officer Chauvin responded in this particular case. The president, he's been a politician for many years. The problem of police criminality, or some people call it police brutality, has been in existence for most of his lifetime. He has not, to my knowledge, been an advocate against police criminality. It's not difficult for a politician. It's a safe position for politicians to be critical of Officer Chauvin. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not enough. And like I said, when I look at the body work of not only Kamala Harris, but President Biden in the past, as it relates to this particular issue, I think they've been silent.
I concur. And to further buttress your point, not only has he been silent on some of the most egregious cases one can imagine, his vice president, Kamala Harris, when told that many guys who were in jail serving time were innocent and that these were dirty cops that pushed these arrests and doctored up evidence against them. And with the overcrowding, they told her to let these guys go because of the overcrowding in the California state system. She said it would put an undue burden on the state of California because of the free labor that is provided by inmates. So Kamala Harris is a fake and a fraud with respect to Black men. She hates Black men. And I'm sure that Biden has no love for Black men. Consequently, I think they were disingenuous, and he's going to put white men to work, and I don't think he cares one bit about Black men.
And as we said, in regards to your question, Michael, the problem of police criminality, police brutality, it's been around, forever. You know what I'm saying? So these people's, whether it's Biden or Harris, I don't think they have a reputation of taking this particular issue seriously. As I stated, it's easy to jump on the bandwagon and be critical of Officer Chauvin because it's recorded. But there's many instances, as you stated, Michael, if there wasn't a recording of this particular incident, what would the position of our community, of those individuals be? I mean, our community have been crying about police criminality, police brutality for decades. And for the most part, it falls on silent ears. So they don't have a history, or I don't believe a documented history of being against, taking an aggressive stand against police brutality or police criminality as it relates to members of our community. There's been police shootings that don't even make it on the news that occur very frequently. This is a very serious issue. Fortunately, as I stated, because of all of these cameras and because of all these recordings, the public is now, and I'm not talking about members of our community, outside of our community, are now having a front seat view of what we've been experiencing for generations, what we've been crying about and arguing about and protesting about for generations. They have a front seat view. So, I don't want them to be episodic and make a comment here or a comment there. When you have a case that makes it to the press and that, there's a video that no one can justify, I want them to talk about the general abuses that our community experiences. I want them to talk about the duplicity, the duality, and judges' decision when they try cases and sentence individuals. Individuals from our community receive harsher sentences. I want them to talk about, the hiring practices. A lot of these departments, these departments aren't reflective of the community that they serve. So there's a whole lot I want them to do proactively, as president and vice president of the United States of America. And that perhaps would, I can give them a good mark as it relates to their position today.
Well, I know our time is almost up. I would just say that Kamala Harris was the one who put laws on the books that allowed them in California to arrest a Black woman whose child missed X number of days in school. They actually locked the mother up. So she can always say she didn't see that coming now, she didn't know. It's all lies.
Right. Okay.
Black people.
Okay, we have 1 minute, Michael. Closing comment?
Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own and be yourself.
Okay, on behalf of Community Cop, we'd like to thank our engineers, Veronica Kidnap, Woods, Sheila Berry, and Big D. A lot of y'all, may not never seen Big D. Perhaps one day he'll come on. Our family will keep our eye open on the sentencing of Officer Chavin to see if the judge sufficiently sentenced him. And then we have to wait on the conviction of the other officers that were also involved in the death of our brother Floyd. But the battle is not over. We shouldn't be celebrating the victory as of yet. Let's see if he's sufficiently sentenced. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll report on that next week. Hotep family,